Ignored by everyone, a street girl crosses paths with a child in a coma and changes the course of a story where even silence was manipulated. What she saw will never be forgotten. A muggy dawn enveloped downtown Miami. The heat persisted even at that hour, causing sweat to bead on the skin of those wandering the deserted streets. Among the few who challenged the nocturnal silence was Annie, a girl of approximately 10 years old, with bare feet and clothes stained with dirt and soot. She walked furtively through the outer corridors of St. Augustine General Hospital. She knew every corner of that place like the back of her hand. She knew where the night guards made their rounds and which doors were rarely locked. For a child who grew up on the streets, this knowledge was a matter of survival. Orphaned from a very young age, Annie lived however she could. During the day, she sold candy at congested traffic lights or collected cans along the beaches. At night, when the threats of the street seemed greater than usual, she found refuge in the forgotten corners of the large hospital. That specific night, something bothered her. It wasn't just the suffocating heat or the hunger that twisted her stomach. It was a strange feeling, a premonition she couldn't explain. She walked silently, avoiding the fluorescent lights that occasionally flickered on the ceiling. She found a cleaning closet between the pediatric wing and the ICU, a perfect hiding place to spend the night. As she accommodated her small body on the cold floor, she heard voices approaching. Instinctively, she curled up even more, hugging her knees against her chest. The closet door had a gap through which she could see the illuminated corridor. Two adults passed by, a tall man in a white coat and an elegant woman with high heels that echoed on the marble floor. They spoke in low tones, but the acoustics of the empty corridor allowed fragments of the conversation to reach Annie's attentive ears. "The Andrews girl's situation is delicate," said the man, adjusting the stethoscope hanging around his neck. "But trust me, Vanessa, this experimental method is revolutionary." The woman smiled, adjusting the badge that identified her as a consultant. Annie noticed the full name, Vanessa Moore. "Edward, you're brilliant. The father is completely convinced this is the only way, and the values he's willing to invest." The two entered a room and the door didn't close completely. Annie heard mentions of high numbers, contained laughter, and something about an exclusive treatment imported from Europe. They cited several times the name of a patient, Lucy Andrews. Annie didn't understand everything they said, but something in that conversation deeply bothered her. The way the doctor and the consultant laughed, the tone of voice they used, it seemed wrong. The next morning, with the first rays of sun infiltrating through the hospital windows, Annie discreetly left her hiding place. She was used to circulating through the corridors without being noticed. It was as if she were invisible to most of the hurried people who worked there. Near the reception, she heard two nurses talking. "How is the Andrews girl today?" "The same. In a vegetative state for almost 5 months. A shame. So young. And Dr. Edward is continuing with that experimental treatment?" "Yes, but I have my doubts. I've heard Dr. Marcia comment that she doesn't see the need for so many medications." But who am I to question? Annie felt a tingling in her stomach. That name, Lucy Andrews, again. Driven by a curiosity that even she couldn't explain, she decided to discover who this girl was. She waited for the right moment, when the shift change created a small confusion, and slipped into the pediatric wing. The corridors were decorated with colorful drawings and stickers of storybook characters, in an attempt to make the environment less frightening for the hospitalized children. Annie walked slowly, reading the names on the doors until she found what she was looking for. Lucy Andrews. She peeked through the glass window. The room was spacious, illuminated by natural light coming through a large window. There were many machines around the bed. Lying between white sheets, a girl of approximately 12 years remained motionless. Her pale skin contrasted with her dark brown hair that framed her face. She seemed to be sleeping peacefully, as if at any moment she might open her eyes. Annie looked to the sides, making sure no one was watching her, and entered the room. She approached the bed with hesitant steps. Up close, she noticed that Lucy had something strange. She didn't seem sick. It was a kind of artificial calmness, as if she were trapped in a sleep that was too deep. "Hi," whispered Annie, feeling a little foolish for speaking to someone who couldn't hear her. "I'm Annie." The silence was broken only by the constant beeping of the machines. Annie extended her hand, lightly touching Lucy's hand. To her surprise, she felt a slight squeeze, almost imperceptible but real. Startled, she quickly withdrew her hand. You're in there?" she asked, eyes wide. No response came, but a feeling of urgency took hold of Annie's chest. Something was wrong. Very wrong. In the following days, Annie began to visit Lucy's room at alternating times, always careful not to be discovered. She began to observe the routine. The nurses who came and went. The visits from the doctor in the white coat, now identified by the badge as Dr. Edward Payne, and especially Vanessa Moore, who seemed to have taken control of everything related to the girl's treatment. During one of these vigils, Annie saw a tall man, with drooping shoulders and deep dark circles, enter the room. By the way he looked at Lucy, she immediately knew he was her father. He sat next to the bed, held his daughter's hand, and began to talk to her as if she could hear him. "Hi, Princess. Daddy's here. The house is so empty without you. I brought more photos to decorate your room. Look, this one is from our trip to Key West, remember? You built that huge sand castle." Annie felt a lump in her throat. Hidden behind the half-open door, she saw when Vanessa arrived, putting her hand on the man's shoulder. "Mr. Andrews, I brought the results of the new tests. I need to talk to you about the next step of the treatment." Carl Andrews nodded, kissed his daughter's forehead, and left the room with Vanessa. Annie waited a few minutes before entering again. She approached Lucy, and on an impulse held her hand. "I'm going to find out what they're doing to you," she promised in a low voice, "and I'm going to help you wake up." At that moment, she felt again a slight squeeze on her hand. It wasn't imagination. Lucy was there somehow, trapped in her own body but conscious. Annie left the hospital that night with a determination she had never felt before. For the first time, she had a purpose beyond daily survival. She was going to discover the truth about Lucy Andrews, and no one would stop her. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Oh, tell us which city you're watching us from. We continue. The sun had barely risen when Annie returned to the hospital. In recent days, she had established a routine. She slept for a few hours in an improvised shelter under the awning of an abandoned store nearby, and before the intense movement of the day began, infiltrated St. Augustine again. There was something about Lucy that attracted her, an inexplicable connection that made her return, even knowing the risks. That morning, Annie found the hospital in an uproar. Nurses were running from one side to the other, and there was a tense atmosphere in the air. She hid behind a large potted plant in the corridor and strained her ears. "Dr. Edward is furious," commented a rushed nurse. "The Andrews monitoring machine registered unusual brain activity last night. Do you think she might be waking up?" asked another. "Unlikely with all that medication, but the doctor wants to redo all the tests. He said he can't lose this patient." Annie felt a shiver run down her spine. Lucy had reacted when she held her hand. It wasn't a coincidence. Determined, she waited for the right moment and headed to the girls' room. She found the environment empty, but soon realized that Lucy wasn't there. A nursing assistant was passing through the corridor, pushing a cart of supplies. "Where is the girl who stays in this room?" Annie asked, trying to sound casual. The man looked at her strangely. "Are you a relative?" "You shouldn't be here alone. I'm her cousin," she lied quickly. "My mom is in the cafeteria and asked me to see if she had returned yet." "Oh, I understand. They took her for a CT scan. She should be back in about an hour, more or less." Annie thanked him and walked away, but she didn't leave. She hid in a corner near the elevator, waiting. After some time, she saw when a stretcher came out of the elevator, conducted by two nurses. It was Lucy, still unconscious, returning to her room. Following them discreetly, Annie saw when Dr. Edward arrived in a hurry, accompanied by Vanessa. The two entered the room right behind the nurses. The door remained ajar, and Annie could hear fragments of the conversation. "Significant brain activity," the doctor said, his voice controlled but tense. "We need to adjust the protocol." "Edward, we can't risk it," Vanessa replied. "We've anticipated too much. The father hasn't signed the documents for the complete treatment abroad yet. If she wakes up now..." "She won't wake up. I'm going to increase the dosage of the experimental sedative. It's risky but necessary. You take care of convincing Carl to sign that authorization as soon as possible." Annie backed away, feeling her heart accelerate. She wanted to understand what was happening. Why didn't they want Lucy to wake up? What treatment abroad was this? Something didn't make sense. Later that same day, she saw when Carl Andrews arrived at the hospital, carrying a small pink backpack. Annie observed as he entered his daughter's room. For some time, she hesitated. Then, taking a deep breath, she approached the door and knocked lightly. Carl opened it, surprised to find a ragged girl outside. "Hi?" he said, confused. "Can I help you?" Annie felt her courage falter for a moment. What would she say? How would she explain her presence there? But the man's tired look, so full of sadness, made her continue. I come to see your daughter sometimes," she confessed. "I know I shouldn't, but I think she hears me." Carl frowned, but he didn't seem angry, just intrigued. "What do you mean you visit her? Who are you?" "My name is Annie. I stay around here sometimes," she explained vaguely. "And last week, when I held her hand, I felt her squeeze back. Weakly, but I felt it." Carl's face transformed. A mixture of hope and distrust. "You felt her respond?" "Are you sure?" "Yes, sir. Twice already. And I think she wants to wake up." Carl looked at his daughter, then back at Annie. Instead of calling security or sending her away, he gestured for her to come in. "Come, show me." Hesitantly, Annie approached the bed. Carl watched attentively. Carefully, the girl touched Lucy's hand. "Hi, Lucy, it's me, Annie. Your dad is here. If you can hear me, squeeze my hand just a little bit." For a moment, nothing happened. The beeping of the machines continued its constant rhythm. Carl sighed, the disappointment evident on his face. Then, almost imperceptibly, Lucy's fingers moved. A slight tremor, followed by a subtle squeeze. At the same time, the heart monitor recorded a small change in the heartbeat. "My God!" exclaimed Carl, eyes wide. She responded. Annie nodded, feeling a wave of relief. She wasn't crazy, she hadn't imagined it. "Has this happened other times? Why hasn't anyone told me anything?" "I tried to talk to a nurse, but she didn't believe me," lied Annie, not wanting to reveal that she was there without permission. "I thought you should know." Carl ran his hand through his hair, visibly shaken. His eyes shined with contained tears. "Dr. Edwards said she has no conscious response, that the brain damage was too extensive. But she does respond, I swear," insisted Annie. Maybe they haven't noticed." At that moment, the sound of heels in the corridor alerted the two. Vanessa Moore was approaching. Carl quickly asked Annie to hide in the room's bathroom. The girl obeyed, leaving the door slightly ajar to listen. "Carl, darling, I came as soon as I could," said Vanessa upon entering. "I brought the forms for the treatment in Switzerland. We need to expedite this. Vanessa, something strange happened. I think Lucy responded to a stimulus. Her monitor recorded a change." Vanessa's voice hardened slightly. "Carl, we've talked about this. They're just involuntary reflexes," Dr. Edward explained in detail. "But what if they aren't? What if she's conscious, just unable to fully wake up?" "Don't feed false hopes," Vanessa reproved, her voice softening. "Trust me, we're doing the best for her. Now, these forms need to be signed today. The Swiss clinic only has openings for next month." From the bathroom, Annie observed through the gap. She saw when Carl reluctantly began to read the documents. She also noticed Vanessa's look at Lucy, devoid of the compassion her voice demonstrated. There was something calculating in those eyes. After Vanessa left, Carl opened the bathroom door. His expression had changed. There was determination now, mixed with doubt. "What's your full name, girl?" "Anna Louisa. But everyone calls me Annie." "Annie, I need you to meet me tomorrow at the cafe on the corner. 10 in the morning. Can you do that?" She nodded, surprised. "Great, and thank you for not giving up on my daughter." When she left the hospital that afternoon, Annie felt a mixture of fear and excitement. For the first time in years, someone had really looked at her, seen beyond the dirty, ragged street girl, and more importantly, they had believed her. That night, instead of sleeping in her usual hiding place, Annie found a bench in the square in front of the hospital. From there, she could observe the lights of the 4th floor where Lucy was. While observing the stars that stubbornly appeared in the polluted sky of the city, she made a silent promise. She would help that unknown girl to awaken, whatever it took. The cafe on the corner of the hospital was small and cozy. The aroma of fresh bread and newly brewed coffee enveloped the environment, creating a welcoming atmosphere that contrasted with the evident tension on Carl Andrews' face. Sitting at a remote table, he constantly consulted his watch while distractedly stirring his cup. Annie observed him through the glass for a few minutes before entering. She had spent the morning trying to improve her appearance. She washed her face at a public drinking fountain, combed her hair with her fingers, and tried to clean her worn clothes as much as possible. Still, when she entered the cafe, she felt the strange looks from the few customers present. "You came," said Carl, rising slightly when she approached. "Please sit down." Annie slid into the chair, feeling uncomfortable in that environment that clearly didn't belong to her world. A waitress approached, looking at her with suspicion. "She's with me," Carl stated firmly. "Could you bring a hot chocolate and some cheese bread, please?" When the waitress walked away, Carl leaned over the table, speaking in a low tone. "I spent the night thinking about what happened. I need to better understand who you are and how you met my daughter." Annie hesitated. Telling the truth could mean trouble, but something in the desperate look of that father made her opt for honesty. "I don't have a home, sir. Sometimes when it rains or gets very dangerous on the street, I hide in the hospital. That's how I found Lucy's room." Carl showed no surprise or judgment, just nodded for her to continue. "I started visiting her because she seemed lonely, and then I realized she reacted when I held her hand. Why do you think the doctors haven't noticed this?" Annie bit her lower lip, unsure. "I don't know, sir, but I heard strange things. The doctor and that woman, Vanessa, they talk about keeping Lucy sedated, as if they didn't want her to wake up yet." The waitress returned with the hot chocolate and cheese bread. Annie took the cup with both hands, feeling the comforting warmth. She was hungry, but controlled herself not to attack the food. "Tell me more about what you heard," Carl asked after the waitress walked away again. Between hesitant bites of the cheese bread, Annie reported the conversations she had witnessed between Dr. Edward and Vanessa. She mentioned the experimental treatment, the references to a Swiss clinic, and how they seemed anxious for Carl to sign the documents. "Are you sure about all this? You're not making it up?" "Why would I make it up?" retorted Annie, feeling slightly offended. "I don't gain anything from this." Carl studied her for a long moment, as if trying to see beyond appearances, looking for signs of lying. Finally he sighed. "I'm sorry. It's just that all of this seems so implausible. Edward is one of the most respected neurologists in the country, and Vanessa was recommended by close friends, people I trust." "You may not believe me, but believe your daughter," said Annie with surprising maturity. "She's trying to come back." Carl rummaged in his bag and took out a small device. "It's a recorder." "Can you use it? I want proof of what you're saying." Annie nodded, still uncertain. She had never used a recorder before, but the operation seemed simple enough. "I need to know the truth about my daughter's condition," continued Carl. "Vanessa insists that the Swiss clinic is the only hope, but the treatment will cost a fortune, and they want me to sign an authorization for experimental procedures that aren't even specified in the documents." "You haven't signed yet?" "No, something bothered me. And after what I saw yesterday," he paused, looking beyond the window toward the hospital. "I know it seems crazy to trust a child I barely know, but I feel like I need to investigate this before making any decision." Before they could continue the conversation, Carl's cell phone rang. He answered quickly, his face stiffening upon hearing the voice on the other end. "Yes, Vanessa. I'll be there in 20 minutes. No, I haven't signed yet. I want to discuss some points with Edward first. I understand your concern, but it's my daughter." "Yes, see you soon." He hung up with a somber expression. "I have to go. She's anxious for me to sign those papers today." Carl took some bills out of his wallet and placed them on the table, much more than the value of the bill. "This is for you. Buy clean clothes and food, and be careful. If what you say is true, these people won't be happy if they discover you know too much." Annie looked at the money, hesitant. She had never seen so much at once. "You don't need to pay me to help. I just want Lucy to wake up." A sad smile crossed Carl's tired face. "It's not payment. It's help. Everybody needs help sometimes." He stood up, but before leaving he added, "Meet me here tomorrow, same time. And be careful with that recorder. It might be our only chance to discover the truth." After Carl left, Annie remained in the cafe for a few more minutes, savoring the rest of the hot chocolate. The trust that man had placed in her, someone society saw as invisible, warmed her heart as much as the drink. With the money she received, Annie did something she hadn't done in years. She entered a clothing store. The saleswoman looked at her with suspicion initially, but when she showed the money, her attitude changed. She left wearing clean jeans shorts and a simple but new t-shirt. She also bought a pair of sandals and basic hygiene products. With the new clothes, she felt different, more confident, less invisible. That afternoon, she returned to the hospital. With her improved appearance, she managed to pass through reception without raising suspicions, pretending to be a visitor. The recorder was hidden in the pocket of her new shorts, turned on and ready to capture any relevant conversation. In the corridor of the pediatric wing, she crossed paths with an older nurse who observed her with curiosity. "Can I help you, girl? Are you looking for someone?" Annie hesitated, fearing being expelled. "I came to visit my friend Lucy Andrews." The nurse frowned. "Lucy? I didn't know she received visitors besides family members. We're neighbors. Her father let me come." The nurse, whose badge identified her as Rita Newton, studied her for a moment. "I understand. Come with me, I'll take you there." During the short journey to the room, Rita asked some casual questions about how Annie knew Lucy. The girl answered vaguely, trying not to contradict herself. There was something in the nurse's look that made her uneasy, as if she knew more than she demonstrated. "We're here," said Rita, as she stopped in front of the door. "Feel free, but don't stay too long. She needs to rest." "Thank you, ma'am." When the nurse walked away, Annie entered the room. Lucy was, as always, motionless between the white sheets, connected to the machines that monitored her vital signs. She approached the bed and held the girl's hand. "Hi, Lucy, it's me, Annie. I talked with your father today. He's starting to believe you can wake up." A slight movement of Lucy's fingers responded to the touch. Annie smiled, gently squeezing the other girl's hand. "We're trying to find out what's happening, why they want to keep you sleeping. You're going to be all right, I promise." The sound of the door opening made Annie turn quickly. It was Rita, the nurse, who entered and closed the door behind her. "You don't know Lucy, do you?" she asked directly, but without hostility. Annie felt her heart accelerate. She thought about denying, inventing a story, but something in the nurse's look made her hesitate. "No," she finally admitted, "but I know there's something wrong with her treatment. She responds when I hold her hand." Rita approached, checking the monitors with experienced eyes. "I know. I've noticed changes in her brain patterns when certain people are in the room, mainly you and her father." The nurse lowered her voice. "And I've also noticed inconsistencies in the medical records and medications prescribed by Dr. Edward." Annie widened her eyes, surprised by the confession. "You also think there's something wrong?" Rita nodded, her expression becoming grave. "I've worked in this hospital for 25 years. I know how to recognize when a patient is being, let's say, kept in a worse condition than they need to be." She hesitated. "I shouldn't be telling you this, but I see how you care about this girl you don't even know. Can I trust you?" asked Annie, remembering the recorder in her pocket. "You can. And if you're trying to help Lucy and her father, then I want to help too." Annie took a deep breath, making a decision. She took the recorder out of her pocket and showed it to the nurse. "Mr. Andrews gave me this. He wants proof of what's happening." Rita looked at the device and then at the girl, a new resolution in her gaze. "Then let's get that proof, together. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us which city you're watching us from. We continue." The alliance between Annie and Rita formed quickly, united by the common desire to discover the truth about Lucy's case. The veteran nurse's experience complemented perfectly with Annie's agility and ability to go unnoticed through the hospital corridors. "You need to understand the gravity of what we're doing," warned Rita, while organizing medication spreadsheets in a small file room. "If what we suspect is true, we're facing powerful people." Annie nodded, watching attentively as Rita separated documents. "I started noticing inconsistencies in the reports about a month ago," continued the nurse. "Medications that weren't in the official protocols, dosages altered without adequate medical justification. At first I thought it was just administrative disorganization. But it wasn't," completed Annie. "No, the patterns were too consistent to be random errors." Rita showed a folder with Lucy's name. "This is a copy of the official medical record. And this," she took out a small notebook from her bag. is the parallel record I started keeping. Annie examined the documents, even without completely understanding the medical terms. What do these names mean? Zolpi something, Zolpidem. It's a sleep inducer, normally used for insomnia, but the dosage prescribed for Lucy is absurdly high. And there are other medications without clear justification in the reports. So they are really keeping her asleep on purpose? Rita sighed deeply. It seems so, but we need to understand why. And mainly we need concrete proof. The plan they developed was simple but risky. Rita would subtly alter her schedule to be present during Dr. Edwards' night visits. Annie, in turn, would hide strategically to record the conversations between the doctor and Vanessa. Be careful with Dr. Silvera, warned Rita. He's the clinical director and a personal friend of Edwards. If he notices what we're doing, he won't notice, guaranteed Annie with the confidence of someone who spent life being invisible to society's eyes. The next morning, Annie met again with Carl at the same cafe. He seemed even more worn out, the dark circles evidencing sleepless nights. I didn't sign the documents, he said before Annie even sat down. I asked for more time to think. Vanessa wasn't happy. You did well, replied Annie, sitting across from him. I met someone who can help us. A nurse named Rita, Carl frowned. Rita Newton, the head nurse of pediatrics. Yes, she also thinks there's something wrong with Lucy's treatment. A flash of hope crossed Carl's tired face. Annie told about the initial discoveries, the inconsistencies in the medical reports, the suspicious medications. But why would they do this? Questioned Carl, his voice choked by contained emotion. What would be the benefit of keeping my daughter in a coma? Money, replied Annie simply. I heard them talking about the values you pay for the experimental treatments. Carl ran his hand over his face, absorbing the impact of that possibility. His eyes, previously just tired, now reflected a controlled fury. I need to see this proof. If they're deliberately harming my daughter, we're working on it. Rita will help with the medical documents and I'll try to record their conversations. Carl extended his hand across the table, firmly holding Annie's. Be very careful. These people, if they're capable of doing this to an innocent child, they won't hesitate to do worse if they discover what we're plotting. That touch, so paternal and concerned, provoked a strange sensation in Annie. She couldn't remember the last time someone had shown genuine concern for her well-being. She felt her eyes moisten, but contained the tears. I'll be careful, I promise. That night the plan was put into practice. Rita had discovered that Dr. Edward would make a night visit to Lucy to adjust her medication protocol. Annie positioned herself strategically in the cleaning closet near the room, with the recorder prepared. Around 10 at night, the doctor arrived, accompanied as always by Vanessa. Rita, pretending to organize medications at the nursing station, observed discreetly. Carl's resistance is becoming a problem, Vanessa was saying as they walked down the corridor. He's hesitant, asking too many questions. Convince him, replied Edward dryly. Use that charm of yours that works so well. The agreement with the Swiss clinic depends on his signature on those documents. I'm trying, but something has changed. He seems to be suspicious. They entered Lucy's room. Annie moved silently, positioning herself near the half-open door, the recorder capturing every word. Her brain patterns are different, commented Edward, examining the monitors. There's more activity than there should be. Is that a problem? Can she wake up? Not with the medication I'm administering. He prepared a syringe with a transparent liquid. This will ensure she remains stable for another 2 weeks, enough time to finalize the transfer to Switzerland. And after that, a heavy silence followed Vanessa's question. The doctor applied the medication to Lucy's IV before responding. Then we follow the plan. The clinic will receive the advance payments for the 1-year experimental treatment. Carl will have limited access to his daughter, only supervised monthly visits. And we secure our future, completed Vanessa, a smile evident in her voice. By the way, I already transferred the first installment of the fees to your account in the Cayman Islands. 300,000 as agreed. Excellent. And what about the American specialist Carl wanted to consult? Uninvited. I told him the man had an unforeseen event and couldn't come to the US. Annie felt her heart racing as she recorded that incriminating conversation. It was worse than she imagined. It wasn't just about money. but an elaborate scheme that involved an international clinic. When the two left the room, Annie waited a few minutes before leaving her hiding place. She found Rita at the nursing station, her face pale. "Did you record it?" asked the nurse in a low voice. "Everything," confirmed Annie, showing the recorder. "They're planning to take Lucy to Switzerland. They talked about accounts, transferred money." "This is more serious than we thought," murmured Rita. "It's not just medical misconduct. It's a conspiracy. We need to show this to Mr. Andrews right now." Rita shook her head. "No, first we need more documentary evidence. Recordings can be contested, manipulated. We need the financial records, the agreements with this Swiss clinic. How are we going to get that?" Dr. Edward keeps a laptop in his office. "I bet there's important information there." The plan became more complex and dangerous. Rita would gain access to the office, using her authorization as head nurse, but would need Annie to distract the secretary. The next day, while Carl kept Vanessa busy with questions about the transfer documents, Rita and Annie executed their part. The girl pretended to faint near the reception of the office, creating the perfect distraction. While everyone turned to help the poor malnourished girl, Rita quickly entered the doctor's room. With the skill born from daily practice with hospital systems, the nurse accessed the computer and transferred various files to a flash drive. She found emails exchanged with the Swiss clinic, preliminary contracts that mentioned unapproved experimental procedures, and most impressively, proof of bank transfers to offshore accounts. When she left the office, Rita made a discreet signal to Annie, who recovered miraculously from her fainting spell and thanked everyone for their help. "We did it," whispered Rita as they walked away. "Now we have enough evidence." That afternoon, they met with Carl in a safe location, Rita's house, a small apartment in the suburbs of Miami. Far from curious eyes and ears, they presented the evidence, the recording, the copied documents, Rita's parallel notes. Carl listened to everything in silence, his face a mask of incredulity and growing anger. When the recording reached the part where they talked about bank transfers, he abruptly stood up. "My God, how could I be so blind? I trusted them. I handed my daughter over to these... Words failed him. "The important thing now is to act with caution," advised Rita. "If we confront them directly, they might try to cover everything up. Or worse, accelerate the plan. What do you suggest then?" "First, you don't sign absolutely anything. Then we need an independent doctor to evaluate Lucy, someone outside Edward's circle of influence. And we need to gradually reduce the medications," added Annie. "She's trying to wake up, I know that. But with so many drugs..." Carl looked at the girl with a mixture of gratitude and amazement. "How is it that a street child perceived what I, with all my resources, couldn't see?" "Sometimes you need to be invisible to see what's in front of everyone," replied Annie simply. A new determination took hold of Carl. He was no longer just a desperate father, but a man with a clear purpose. "We're going to expose these monsters. They'll pay for every day they kept my daughter in this state. And you, Annie," he hesitated, emotional, "you brought the light I needed to find the way back to my daughter again." The alliance was sealed, the plan established. The three knew they were facing powerful and determined people. But they had something stronger on their side: the truth and a father's unconditional love for his daughter. What none of them could predict was that their small group of conspirators was about to increase, bringing a twist that no one expected. The morning dawned gray over Miami, foretelling rain. At St. Augustine Hospital, an almost palpable tension hung in the air. The plan traced by Carl, Rita, and Annie entered its most critical and risky phase. After careful deliberation, they had agreed that the intervention needed to be gradual. Rita, using her position as head nurse, would begin to subtly replace the high doses of sedatives with harmless saline solutions. Annie would maintain constant vigilance, observing any suspicious movement from Edward or Vanessa, and Carl, the central piece, would continue pretending to consider the transfer to Switzerland, gaining precious time. "Remember," instructed Rita while preparing syringes with saline solution identical to the originals, "we have to be extremely cautious. If we reduce the doses too quickly, withdrawal effects can occur." "How long will it take until she starts to react?" asked Carl, the anxiety evident in his voice. "Impossible to say with certainty. Days, maybe a week. It depends on how long it will take for the drugs to completely leave her system." Meanwhile, Carl had secretly contacted a trusted specialist, Dr. Matthew Lincoln, a renowned neurologist from New York and an old college friend. He would arrive the next day for a casual visit, without arousing suspicions. In the corridor outside Lucy's room, Annie observed the movement of the hospital with attentive eyes. Her presence no longer caused strangeness. Rita had created a cover story, presenting her as a volunteer from the long-term pediatric patient companion program. "Everything quiet?" asked Rita as she passed, carrying a tray with medications. "So far." "Vanessa called half an hour ago, said she was on her way." Rita nodded, quickly entering Lucy's room. With precise movements born from years of experience, she exchanged the intravenous medication bag. The new bottles looked identical to the previous ones, but contained significantly reduced doses of the sedatives. "Done," she whispered to Annie as she left. "Now we wait." The wait, however, was interrupted by an unexpected development. That same afternoon, while Annie discreetly kept watch near the reception, she spotted a familiar figure entering the hospital. It was an elegant woman, approximately 50 years old, with perfectly arranged grey hair and impeccable posture. Even though she had never seen that person before, something about her immediately seemed familiar to Annie. The woman headed directly to the counter, her voice firm and determined. "My name is Helen Andrews. I've come to see my granddaughter, Lucy Andrews." Annie's heart accelerated. Lucy's grandmother. Quickly, she sent a message to Rita through the cheap cell phone that Carl had given her for emergency communication. Rita arrived minutes later, finding Helen in a heated discussion with the receptionist, who claimed she couldn't authorize the visit without prior approval from the responsible doctor. "Mrs. Andrews?" Rita softly intervened. "I'm Rita Newton, head nurse of pediatrics. If you'd like to come with me, I can take you to your granddaughter." The receptionist opened her mouth to protest, but Rita silenced her with a firm look. "I have the authority to allow family visits. Assume responsibility in my name." As they walked through the corridors, Helen explained her unexpected presence. "I've been in Europe for the last 6 months. My son Carl always told me that Lucy was stable in treatment. But yesterday I received a strange call from a former employee of ours, saying there was something wrong, that I should come immediately." Rita exchanged a significant look with Annie, who was discreetly following them. Someone else had noticed that something wasn't right. Upon entering Lucy's room, Helen brought her hands to her face, visibly shocked by her granddaughter's state. My God, what have they done to her? Carl said she was improving, that the treatment was progressing. "Ma'am," said Rita carefully, "there's a lot you need to know, but not here, not now. Your son will be here soon. Please wait for him." Helen's arrival introduced a new element of unpredictability to the plan. When Carl appeared an hour later, the tension between mother and son was palpable. "Why did you lie to me, Carl? You said she was responding to the treatment." "Mom, And who is this Vanessa who seems to make all the decisions about my granddaughter? I called our family doctor in New York, and he's never heard of this experimental treatment." The discussion was interrupted when Annie noticed a movement on the bed. A slight tremor in Lucy's eyelids, almost imperceptible. "Look," she exclaimed, approaching the bed. "She's trying to open her eyes." Everyone turned. Indeed, Lucy's eyelids trembled slightly, as if she were fighting against the heavy induced sleep. "This shouldn't happen so quickly," murmured Rita, checking the monitors with concern. "The medications are still in her system. What's happening?" asked Helen, confused. Carl, in an impulse of desperate honesty, told his mother everything, and the suspicions, the gathered evidence, the plan to gradually reduce the medications. Helen listened in shocked silence, her expression changing from anger to incredulity, and finally to cold determination. "I'm going to sue this hospital to the fullest extent," she declared when Carl finished. "And as for this Vanessa and this doctor—" "First we need to help Lucy," interrupted Annie with surprising firmness. "She's fighting to come back." As if responding to those words, Lucy's fingers moved, slightly grasping the sheet. "Call Dr. Matthew right now," instructed Carl to Rita. "Say it's an emergency, and don't let anyone else enter this room." The next hours were of growing tension. Rita managed to contact Dr. Matthew, who advanced his arrival to that same night. Meanwhile, Vanessa repeatedly called Carl, increasingly insistent. "She knows something is wrong," commented Carl, hanging up the phone after refusing the 5th call. We need to prepare for the confrontation. The storm that had been announced in the morning finally broke over the city. Heavy rain lashed the hospital windows, creating a curtain of water that isolated Lucy's room even more from the outside world. It was in this dramatic scenario that what everyone hoped for and feared at the same time happened. Around 7 in the evening, Vanessa appeared at the hospital, accompanied by Dr. Edward. Both seemed tense, irritated by Carl's incommunicability. When they tried to enter Lucy's room, they found the door locked from inside. "Carl, open this door immediately," demanded Vanessa, knocking forcefully. Inside, the group exchanged apprehensive looks. The moment of confrontation had arrived earlier than expected, even before Dr. Matthew's arrival. "I'll open it," decided Carl. "We can't seem like we're hiding something." When the door opened, Vanessa and Edward found themselves facing not only Carl, but also Helen, Rita, and Annie, all positioned protectively around Lucy's bed. "What does this mean?" questioned Edward, his gaze fixed on Rita. "Who authorized all these people here? And why do the monitors show alterations in the medications?" "The correct question, Doctor," retorted Helen, stepping forward, "is why did you keep my granddaughter artificially in a coma for all these months?" Edward visibly paled while Vanessa assumed a defensive posture. "This is absurd. We're applying an experimental protocol that is the only hope for Lucy. A protocol that curiously involves bank transfers to offshore accounts," asked Carl, his voice surprisingly calm. "A treatment that no other specialist can explain or approve?" It was then that an unexpected sound interrupted the confrontation. A weak moan, almost inaudible, coming from the bed. Everyone turned to see Lucy, whose eyes now visibly struggled to open. "It's not possible," murmured Edward, shocked. "She shouldn't be reacting like this unless—" His accusing gaze turned to Rita. "You altered the medications." "For her own good," confirmed Rita without hesitation. "And I have all the records of the substances you were administering without medical justification." The situation deteriorated quickly. Vanessa, realizing that the scheme was about to collapse, tried to leave the room, but Helen blocked her path with surprising agility. "You're not going anywhere until you explain exactly what you did to my granddaughter." While the tension escalated, Annie remained by Lucy's side, holding her hand, whispering words of encouragement. She was the first to notice when the girl's eyes finally opened, confused brown eyes blinking against the artificial light of the room. "She woke up!" exclaimed Annie, tears of joy streaming down her dirty face. Lucy woke up. Time seemed to freeze. All the adults, including Edward and Vanessa, turned to the bed. Lucy looked around, confused, her eyes finally fixing on Carl. "Dad?" Her voice came out hoarse, almost unrecognizable after months without use. Carl sobbed, falling to his knees beside the bed, taking his daughter's hand between his. "I'm here, my love. I'm here." Edward backed toward the door, his face a mask of panic. Vanessa, realizing there was no escape, changed tactics. "This is wonderful," she exclaimed with false enthusiasm. "Our treatment worked, Edward. She's responding." "Don't you dare," hissed Helen, her gaze sharp as steel. "Don't you dare try to claim this as your success." At that moment, the door opened again, revealing a middle-aged man with a medical folder. "Sorry for the delay," said Dr. Matthew, entering the already crowded room. "The storm disrupt—" He stopped, noticing Lucy awake. My God, she's conscious. The chaos that followed was almost cinematic. Edward tried to explain his conduct, claiming that the experimental protocol was genuine, just adapted to maximize profits. Vanessa, in turn, abandoned the doctor to his own fate, claiming that she just followed professional guidance, without knowledge of the medical implications. Dr. Matthew, after a preliminary evaluation, confirmed what everyone already suspected. There was no neurological reason for Lucy to remain in an induced coma. The damage from the initial seizure had been minimal, and with adequate treatment she could have recovered in a few weeks. "This is criminal," declared the doctor, his professional indignation evident. "I'm going to report this to the medical board immediately." While the adults discussed the legal and medical implications, Annie remained by Lucy's side, who now observed her with curiosity. "Who are you?" asked Lucy, her voice still weak. "I'm Annie. I kept visiting you while you were sleeping." "I heard you," your voice Everything was dark, but I heard. Silent tears ran down Annie's face. Behind her, Carl observed the interaction, his own vision blurred by emotion. The storm outside began to abate, as if nature recognized that the true storm inside that hospital room was finally coming to an end. A new phase was beginning, of recovery, of reckoning, of reconstruction. For Annie, the invisible girl whom no one noticed, something fundamental had changed forever. For the first time in years, she was seen. She was important. She had made a difference. 3 months passed since Lucy's dramatic awakening. Miami now lived in the fullness of summer, with sunny days and starry nights that seemed to celebrate the new phase in the lives of all those involved in that extraordinary story. The St. Augustine Hospital case, as it became known in the local press, caused an earthquake in the city's private healthcare system. Dr. Edward Payne had his medical license suspended while awaiting trial for professional misconduct, fraud and unauthorized medical procedures. Vanessa Moore faced similar accusations, in addition to extortion and false representation. The scheme they had created, it was discovered later, was not limited to Lucy. Other patients with wealthy families had also been victims of exaggerated diagnoses and unnecessarily prolonged treatments. For Lucy, the physical recovery was surprisingly quick. After weeks of intensive physiotherapy to recover the muscle mass lost during the months of immobility, she could already walk alone, although still with some difficulty. The emotional recovery, however, was a more delicate process. The sessions with the psychologist helped her process the lost time and the fragments of consciousness she had maintained during the induced coma. "I could hear voices," she explained during one of the sessions, "mainly my dad's and then Annie's. They were like lights in a dark tunnel, you know, showing me the way back." The connection between Lucy and Annie strengthened in a way no one could have predicted. They were like two sides of the same coin, one born in privilege but deprived of her childhood by others' greed, the other raised in adversity but endowed with an unshakable inner strength. On that particular morning, Carl Andrews observed the two girls in the garden of his house in Coral Gables. Lucy, sitting in a wheelchair she rarely used now, more at her father's insistence than out of real necessity, was teaching Annie to play chess. The contrast between them was still visible. Lucy with her brand-name clothes and perfectly combed hair, Annie with simple attire, though clean and new, and rebellious hair that resisted any attempt at domestication. "I never imagined I would live to see this day," commented Helen, approaching her son with 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Carl and sat beside him on the porch. "Neither did I. Mom, there were moments when I completely lost hope." "Thank God that girl appeared." Helen looked affectionately at Annie. "Have you decided what you're going to do about her?" Carl nodded, taking a sip of coffee before answering. "I spoke with the social worker yesterday. The temporary guardianship process was approved. If all goes well, in a few months I can file for adoption." Helen smiled, gently pressing her son's shoulder. "Are you sure you're prepared? Raising one daughter is already challenging. Imagine 2, especially one with Annie's background." "I've never been so certain of anything in my life," replied Carl with conviction. "She saved Lucy, Mom. Not just physically, but she brought me back to reason when I was blindly following wrong advice. And look how happy Lucy is with her." In the garden, an exclamation of triumph from Annie signaled that she had captured an important piece. Lucy laughed, feigning indignation at her friend's unexpected move. "Besides," continued Carl, "she deserves a home, a family. She has extraordinary potential. The private tutor has already commented on her facility with mathematics. With the right opportunities—" "You don't need to convince me," Helen gently interrupted. "I just want to be sure you're doing this for the right reasons, not out of gratitude or obligation." "At first, perhaps it was gratitude," admitted Carl. "But now it's something more. She's already part of the family, isn't she?" Helen nodded, visibly moved. They observed in contemplative silence as the girls continued their game, occasionally laughing or discussing strategies. Rita Newton, who had become a constant presence in the life of this newly formed family, arrived shortly after. After the case came to light, she was initially suspended by the hospital for violation of protocols, but quickly reinstated with honors when the extent of the scheme was revealed. Now she coordinated a complete audit of St. Augustine's procedures, implementing new systems to prevent similar abuses. "I brought Lucy's vitamins," she announced as she entered the garden, raising a small bag. "And some chocolates for the chess champion, whoever she may be." "You'll have to split the chocolates," replied Lucy, laughing. "Annie is beating me." Rita sat with the girls, observing the board with interest. Beyond her professional role, she had become a kind of aunt to both, the practical and affectionate female figure who balanced the perhaps excessive protection of Carl and Helen. How was the consultation with the neurologist? Rita asked Carl when he approached. "Excellent. He said Lucy is completely recovered neurologically. The exams show no sequelae. He recommended continuing with physiotherapy for 2 more months, but just to strengthen the muscles. And the nightmares." Carl sighed. Despite the impressive physical recovery, Lucy still suffered from recurring nightmares, traumatic fragments from her period in an induced coma. Less frequent. The therapist says it's normal, part of the process. With time, they'll diminish. "And did you tell her about the party?" Carl's face lit up with a smile. "Not yet. I wanted it to be a surprise." The party in question was a double celebration, Lucy's 13th birthday and the officialization of Annie's temporary guardianship. Carl had planned everything meticulously, wanting to mark the new beginning for his expanded family. "Lucy will love it," commented Rita, "and it will mean a lot to Annie too." "When do you plan to tell her about the adoption?" "After the party. I want to see first how she reacts to the idea of temporary guardianship. It's a lot of change for a child who lived so long on the streets, with complete independence." Rita nodded understandingly. From the beginning, she had warned about the need to respect Annie's pace, not to impose too many changes at once. The girl, despite all her strength, carried deep emotional scars from abandonment and life on the streets. The following weeks were of intense preparations. Helen, who decided to remain in Miami indefinitely, coordinated the details of the party with the efficiency of a general. The old Andrews mansion, silent for so long during Lucy's illness, gained new life with decorators, florists, and organizers coming and going. Annie observed everything with a mixture of fascination and discomfort. Although she had been living in the house for almost 2 months, she still felt like a visitor in many aspects. The luxury, the abundance, the infinite possibilities, everything was strange for someone who had grown up fighting for daily survival. "Do you think I'll ever get used to it?" she asked Lucy one night while they shared a pot of ice cream in the kitchen away from the adults. "To what?" "Living here. To all of this. To people caring about me. To not having to fight for each meal. To having a family." Lucy considered the question seriously. Despite the difference in origins, there was a shared maturity between the two. Lucy forced to mature by months of imprisoned consciousness, Annie hardened by the raw reality of the streets. "I think some things we never forget," she finally answered. "Like I'll never completely forget what it was like to be trapped inside my own body. But that doesn't mean we can't be happy anyway, you know." Annie nodded, surprised by the depth of the answer. There was a mutual understanding between them that transcended words, an empathy born from completely different but equally transformative traumatic experiences. The day of the party arrived, bringing an exceptionally blue sky, as if nature itself wanted to participate in the celebration. The garden of the Andrews mansion was decorated with vibrant tropical flowers and delicate paper lanterns that swayed gently in the sea breeze. A small orchestra played classical music, mixed with American rhythms. Carl gathered everyone in the center of the garden for a toast. The entire family was there, Helen, some cousins and uncles who came especially for the occasion, Rita, some of Lucy's school friends, and even Dr. Matthew, who continued to supervise her recovery. At the center of it all, the 2 girls, Lucy in a turquoise dress that enhanced her now healthily colored skin tone, and Annie, visibly uncomfortable but radiant in an emerald green dress specially chosen by Helen. "I want to thank everyone for their presence on this special day," began Carl, his voice choked with emotion. "Today we celebrate not only my daughter Lucy's birthday, but also the miracle of having her back with us, fully recovered." Emotional applause briefly interrupted his speech. "And we also celebrate," he continued when silence returned, "an addition to our family." He turned to Annie, extending his hand to her. "Annie, thanks to your courage, determination, and kindness, My daughter is here today. I can never fully repay what you did, but I would like to offer you a home, a family, and all the opportunities you deserve." Annie felt her legs tremble. Carl bent down slightly, getting to the level of her eyes. "The judge has just approved my petition for temporary guardianship. If you want, this will be your home from now on. And in the future, if you agree, I would like to start the formal adoption process." An absolute silence fell over the garden. All eyes turned to Annie, whose wide eyes filled with contained tears. For a terrible moment, Carl feared he had made a mistake, had presumed too much. It was Lucy who broke the impasse. Approaching and holding Annie's hand, "Say yes, please," she whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I always wanted a sister." Something collapsed inside Annie. A wall, a defense, an armor built over years of abandonment and loneliness. The tears she had contained for so long flowed freely now. "Yes," she managed to say between sobs. "Yes, I want to." The applause exploded again, many guests also wiping discreet tears. Carl hugged the two girls, and soon Helen and Rita joined the collective embrace. Later, when the party was in full swing, Annie found a moment to step away, observing from a distance the scene that seemed to come from an impossible dream. Rita approached, offering a cup of juice. "It's okay if it's too much sometimes," the nurse said gently. "Big changes, even good ones, can be scary." "I'm not scared," replied Annie after a moment of reflection. "I'm grateful. For a long time I thought I was invisible to the world, that no one really saw me or cared. But then you found Lucy," completed Rita. "Or maybe she found you." Annie smiled, looking at the party where Lucy, surrounded by friends, occasionally glanced at her to make sure she was okay. "We're similar, you know. Both of us were trapped. She in a sleep from which she couldn't awaken. Me in a life where no one saw me. Somehow we freed each other." Rita smiled, impressed with the wisdom of that child who'd already lived so much in so few years. "And now? What comes next?" Annie shrugged, a gesture that mixed the child she was with, the old soul she carried. "Now we live, I guess, day after day, learning to trust, to belong." From across the garden, Carl raised his glass in a silent toast when his eyes met Annie's. She returned the gesture, feeling a wave of belonging she had never experienced before. The sun was beginning to set on the Miami horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. A gentle breeze blew from the ocean, bringing the aroma of salt and new possibilities. In the garden, illuminated by lanterns, the music played, people laughed, and two girls, one who had